20,000 women attended Temple University, my college. Among the 3 most gorgeous ladies present was Diana, the woman I would one day marry. Every male in the cafeteria was longing for the 3 goddesses who were seated together one day. One of the girls, Sally, and I were study friends. When I came over and sought permission to draw the 3 of them, I was unaware of the other 2. "Have you got anything more important to do?" the tall brunette Diana inquired. Taking her hand, I replied no. "Then," she said, "you had best do a decent drawing. Naturally, it will be beneficial." I responded, "You 3 ladies inspire me." The most attractive lady I had ever dated was a 6+, and she was a 10. Until Sally, Diana was obviously not interested in me. After glancing over the sketch, one of the other 3 stunning women planted a fiercely passionate kiss on me. Then she gave me a wink, and I realized what she was doing. Diana, glaring at Sally with triumph that she had taken me away, glanced at the sketch and planted an equally intense kiss on my lips. She remarked, "You're incredibly skilled." Sally gave me another wink and gestured to Diana from behind her back. She was aware of my interest in Diana, and Sally was skilled in piquing Diana's curiosity in me. She desired to enviously provoke her. Sally left me with a kiss on her lips. Diana took hold of my hand. "You must be unique if Sally is attracted to you. I am not in a relationship." "Are you dating someone?" I gave a headshake. She answered, "Well, you do now, and we have been dating ever since." I suppose if she hadn't been a little odd, a little strange and impulsive, and maybe even weird, she wouldn't have been attracted to me. That drawing and several more of my wife and kids are currently up on the wall of our living room. I have stopped drawing by hand. I use a computer and have a good understanding of them. I wasn't sure what she saw in me at first, but I quickly realized. She treated everyone who tried to talk to her quite badly. I discovered several years later that she had autism spectrum disorders. Asperger's condition affected her. The only individual who could tolerate her occasional insults by turning them into jokes was myself. She insulted all the other guys that liked her, and I knew that they didn't think highly of her, so I never understood why they broke up with her. When we were 18, we began dating. We relocated to Los Angeles by the age of 26, were married at age 21, and had our first kid at age 24. There are days when my wife doesn't say much more than pass the salt. She spoke less after realizing that the majority of the things she uttered to people were uncontrollably offensive remarks. Even though, while we were dating, I didn't get it. I found out after we were married that she had depression as well. She would frequently weep for hours at a time. Sometimes it would cheer her up, so I would cuddle her and tell her the kids and I loved her. Maybe a more astute guy would have abandoned her, but I was too in love with her, and I would never abandon our kids. I've never encountered any children that seem to flourish after a divorce, but maybe there are some. Did I mention that she was the most gorgeous woman I had ever known, not just the most beautiful one I had ever dated? Some evenings I would lie awake staring at my gorgeous wife and praising God. That must make me superficial. What? Now? I also discovered that she felt happy the harder she worked. I was the complete opposite. When we were seniors, we founded a prosperous advertising agency. My spouse handled all other tasks, while I handled the creative job. Together we made a fantastic team. The neighborhood was still unsafe, but we paid relatively little for a fixer-upper property in a gentrifying district on the rise. We remodeled it for years, using every spare dollar. I worked out practically every day in the weightlifting and media rooms that we created. I was not too bad of a shape. Men were continuously making advances on my wife, so I had to be if I wanted to retain her. In good times and bad, we cohabited and worked together around the clock, and I cherished every second of it. I made an effort to fill the void in Diana's life because she struggled to make and maintain friends. In a flash, 25 years passed and our 3rd kid was born. Then everything turned bad, and I was completely blind to it. My spouse was evolving. She sobbed in my arms one day, telling me that guys had stopped flirting or staring at her whenever she entered a place, and how badly she needed and missed that. Even though I assured her how lovely she still was, she grieved every day as she looked at the wrinkles on her face in the mirror. She sobbed, saying that because we were married so young, she had lost out on all the joy in life. I continued by saying that she also missed getting herpes or worse and having her heart shattered repeatedly. Despite several men making advances toward her, my spouse had never even glanced at another man. My mental stability was founded upon her fidelity. That all changed when my wife started going to our youngest son's primary school in a carpool with Carol, a woman she had become friends with. Initially, I was overjoyed that my spouse had at last a friend. She worked as a realtor. Her spouse was someone I knew. Barry practiced law, but I had no idea that he was also a divorce attorney who took use of his wife to get business by dissolving the marriages of ladies she made friends with. Carol would also receive the commission and listing for the divorcee's home as a bonus. Carol's objections were often voiced by my wife, who also started comparing me to wealthy and successful Barry and chastising me for putting in too much overtime and making too little money. In order to send our 2 elder children to Ivy League institutions, I was putting in extra hours at work. There was very little money left over after their tuition. However, the value of our property had increased significantly, and it was now about $2 million. Deanna was often griping about how Carol's husband was able to purchase a Mercedes for her, and that they traveled frequently and owned a holiday house near Carmel. To be such a letdown to my wife crushed my heart. I had spent the last 25 years attempting to please her. She obviously didn't care, though. Then every Saturday night, she and Carol would go out for a ladies' night out. Deanna, my Asperger's wife, who never knows when to shut up, admitted after the first night that Carol didn't understand why Deanna settled for me when she was capable of so much more. I'm not a moron. I didn't express my disapproval or protest. I followed them on their next outing after borrowing a friend's automobile. They proceeded to a bar where they ran across Carol's extremely attractive younger acquaintance, who spent the entire night dancing too close to my wife. I calmly took some pictures and waited in the parking lot next to my wife's car, even though I really wanted to approach them and beat the guy unconscious. I would have beaten the snot out of this tall, slender, gorgeous lad in the parking lot, and gone to jail a happy man when she departed with the gentleman. However, Carol and my wife departed without him. I was swinging between angry rage and broken-hearted sadness, and I needed to think of a plan. I brewed a pot of tea for the 2 of us and hurried my wife home. She told me all about her night, including the fact that she had danced with other men. Each once. It was a lie from her. I knew to exercise caution. My wife must have been tremendously turned on by my flirting with the other guy, because she spent the rest of the night making out with me constantly, until I had to beg for forgiveness. She went into our backyard and spoke softly on her mobile phone for the remainder of the week. Our credit card account revealed that she had gone shopping and purchased some highly suggestive items, which she kept hidden from me. My wife's car wouldn't start the next week, so she remained home instead of going out on a girls' night out. I had unplugged the battery. I was hoping that this time, around my wife's feelings for that person would lessen. I was looking for a way to make things right between us. I proposed that we enroll in a film course at the nearby college, where we would watch upcoming movies. Although my wife seemed to welcome the idea, she decided against it the following day. She told me that Carol had told her not to take a class with me since it was simply a ruse to control her. Even so, what does that mean? What complete nonsense. Relentless. I purchased tickets for this Saturday night's ballet. Despite her love for ballet, my wife declined since she was going out with Carol once again. My marriage was seriously failing. Carol and my wife visited the same pub that week once again. My wife sat next to the same man, and I was seated far away but still in view. Of course, to conceal my identity, I donned sunglasses, a hat, and a wig. Normally, my non-drinking wife was making up for lost time. Her boy toy's hands were between her thighs as my wife was growing tipsy, and instead of objecting as his hand moved upward, she leaned in to plant a kiss. I knew I had to put an end to her raging enthusiasm for her male toy because I had had enough. I reasoned that a pitcher of beer might solve a lot of life's issues. At the adjacent table were 2 inebriated guys who were broke but yet wanted to drink. I offered them $500 at the bar to purchase 2 giant images of beer. If following their purchase, they would trip over one of the beer-themed photos and pour it all over my wife. They agreed. And a little while after, my wife in her opulent new shoes and clothes were covered in half a gallon of beer and emanated a strong brewhouse odor. After cursing the males, she tried to dry herself off in the women's restroom. Alone, she exited the restaurant and went back to her car. I trailed after at a safe distance. The automobile swerved out of her lane. She consumed too much alcohol. I called the police to report a suspected intoxicated driver. I told them the make, the registration plate, and the direction she was driving on Wilshire Boulevard. When the police pulled over my wife, they saw that she had alcohol on her and took her into custody for DUI. I told her how upset I was with her and let her spend the night in the drunk tank before going to get her. I assured her that her girls' evenings out were finished and that I wouldn't help her out again. Carol was correct, she said. I didn't want Carol to enjoy herself because I was too bossy and envious of her. Okay, then I'm not going to save you. Give Carol a call so she can help you. I'm heading out. I got her out of jail after she sobbed and vowed to stop going out on girls' evenings out after pleading and begging. Carol stopped going out on dates, but she continued to meddle in my marriage. Carol had a hidden agenda even when she asked us to supper. Abruptly, she and her spouse questioned me over our net worth and my earnings. I was being evaluated based on how big of a soaking they could give me in a divorce. They invited us over for another purpose, too. They requested me to look at their damaged computer because I deal with graphic programs all day and I'm really good with computers. I ordered them to return to drinking in the den while I attempted to troubleshoot the office computer. As is often always the case, I started by turning it off and back on, which resolved the issue. I was naturally intrigued and wanted to find out more about my opponents. Finding the husband's QuickBooks and accounting records on the computer didn't take me long. He made almost $500,000 a year for 5 years, but while reviewing his TurboTax return, I discovered that he only sent $20,000 to the IRS. I put all of this information in my pocket after printing it out. You're never going to want to underestimate me. It will never occur to you that I am pursuing you. And it was coming for these two. After we departed that evening, my wife told me that Carol had extended an invitation to spend a week beginning on Labor Day Friday at her vacation house in Carmel, California, which is 300 miles north of Los Angeles. I thought that was fantastic. She was tired and in need of rest. I hired a private investigator to follow her around the next day, maybe for a tryst. As a fuck you gesture, I bought a couple dozen condoms and put them in her baggage. I purchased a burner phone at the PI's recommendation to make it more difficult for a divorce-related subpoena to find our correspondence. My wife lost her balance while lugging 2 big luggage out of our house. She stumbled, fell, and struck her face on the incline, cutting her eye black. Presumably, the PI trailed her to her friend's beachfront home, but called to let me know that my wife picked up a man at Carol's residence instead of Carol. They traveled 100 miles south instead of north to get to Carmel. It turned out that the man my wife had danced with in the photo I had supplied the PI was the identical one. They finally found themselves at Laguna Beach Hotel Room 515. Because there were police officers in the hotel restaurant nearby, the PI spoke to me in whispered tones. He inquired as to what I wanted done. I told him to report that a prostitute was being beaten up in that room on the rush of the moment, remembering my wife's black eye. Before they had time for sex, I hoped the cops could put an end to the celebration. My wife was caught for prostitution 5 minutes after the PI told me she had been marched out of the room while fully clothed. For assault and violence, her partner was taken into custody. My wife called me an hour later, sobbing. She requested that I free her from custody. She refused to tell me the nature of the offense, only the location of her. She refused to respond when I asked, acting foolish, why she wasn't in Carmel. $5,000 was her bail. When our bank opened in the morning, I assured her I would drive down after taking out the cash. I didn't drive down to save her or take out the cash. I wanted to put her away for the whole 3-day Labor Day weekend, since she hadn't learned anything from her one night in jail last month. When I attended her arraignment, I saw her enter a guilty plea while wearing chains, dressed in an orange prison outfit. I have observed my wife to be confused, unhappy, joyful, and sad in the past. However, this was the first time I'd ever seen her totally shattered and vanquished. She was at her lowest point. It was assumed that the large number of condoms in her suitcase indicated she was a prostitute. She received a 6-month prison term. If she managed to remain out of trouble for a full year, the punishment was suspended. Carol's spouse, a lawyer, was a major surprise for her. He also stood in for my wife's John, who appeared to get along well with Carol's spouse. My PI looked into it for me and discovered that Carol's husband had represented all 3 of the wives' names in 3 prior divorce disputes involving the boyfriend. My wife begged me not to file for divorce, but I discovered that Carol had linked up my gullible wife with a gigolo so she could collect a 6% commission on our $2 million property, and her husband could get a few $100s representing my wife. I didn't file because, in part, I was too busy loving my kids and my crazy, neurotic, unhappy wife. The second reason was that I refused to give that bloodthirsty lawyer and his bloodthirsty wife a cent from us. I also wanted to stay married since I would lose my younger kid, my house, and my alimony payments to my ex-wife until Judgment Day. I also had no desire to move from my lovely home to a walk-up, 1-bedroom apartment in a terrible area. At last, my wife realized that Carol was only pretending to be her friend and saw her as a simpleton and weak-willed scapegoat who could be easily duped. I told my wife that while some people got away with infidelity, karma would always find her, and I would let her rot in jail for 6 months the next time. I also told her that I would email her conviction papers and mug photographs to everyone she had ever known if I ever had the slightest inkling that she was eyeing another man. I added that sometimes I would use a private eye to surreptitiously follow her locations, and other times I would do it all by myself. I would know if she strayed, and retribution would come quickly and horribly. She responded no when I inquired whether I had really been that horrible of a spouse. She just developed an addiction to the attention, affirmation, and praise she received from a charming young man who thought she was attractive and desirable. She also missed the thrill of the organized trip to Laguna Beach and the secret rendezvous at the club. I stated, "You can carry on with your conduct if you find it exhilarating to be incarcerated. I'm a really laid-back guy. I last got into a fight in the 9th grade. Compared to me, he was larger. Despite knowing that he would beat the living hell out of me, I refused to give up, and he carried it out. My nose was bloodied as I left. My only injury to him was getting my blood all over his clothes. I'm not aggressive or rough until you attempt to rape my family or me. Even if I don't win, I won't give up. Barry's tax return and financial records were delivered to the closest franchise tax office in California, as well as the Federal Internal Revenue Office. They clarified that I could be eligible for a prize if my information was correct. I had more fucking to do with him. A lawyer or real estate agent may lose their license to practice if they are found guilty of tax evasion, which is a morally repugnant felony. The Real Estate Commission and the State of California Bar Association office, where Barry and Carol's finances and tax filings were my last 2 trips of the day. Barry was also discovered by the IRS's forensic accountants to have embezzled money from his clients. The fact that he hired a gigolo to dissolve marriages didn't bother the state bar. I told them he was a filthy lowlife who ruined families. They gave me the impression that I was a simpleton who didn't deserve their attention. Then I called the lawyer a low-life piece of shit scum. That's probably redundant. As I rushed out, what else would you expect from a lawyer? A few months later, I was thrilled to read in the papers about Barry, a well-known divorce lawyer in the area who was charged with tax evasion and had his license revoked. Barry and Carol owing over $1 million to the Franchise Tax Board and the IRS. His house safe contained almost $400,000 in undeclared cash that the IRS seized. Barry spent 2 years behind bars. To settle his outstanding taxes, his residence and vehicles were seized. I won the Mercedes-Benz of his wife at an IRS auction for a song. I told my wife that it's simple to live the high life, a la Barry and Carol, as long as you don't pay your taxes. Since I had paid my taxes, I realized that, compared to them, I was an embarrassment, having far less money than they had. After a year, I got a $40,000 award from the IRS and treated my wife to an extravagant trip to Tahiti, where we finished reconstructing our marriage. Carol works as an overweight clerk at our neighborhood grocery store. To be able to brag and smile at her, I make sure to constantly be in line at her pay register. In the parking lot, she needs to walk by her old Mercedes-Benz convertible to get to her car, a 20-year-old Honda Rust bucket, so I also make sure she knows I own it. She never understood how the IRS got a hold of her and her spouse. Indeed, karma is a bitch, but occasionally an ungrateful spouse has to assist with it. It was a decade ago. Our marriage didn't return to normal for a year after our vacation to Tahiti, but my wife learned her lesson and now, like Johnny Cash, she walks the walk. I appreciate you seeing. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you liked this video in order to see more tales like to it. And until we meet again.